Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be painting an Einhyr champion from the League of Votann box set. And I assembled the model all the way up to the point where it get in the way of painting, which basically is completely assembled except for his head, and he has this like thing that's above his head, this ram's head, and the base is separate. And I primed them all with Bright Touch General Purpose Gray Car Primer. And here are all the paints and washes I used for this model kit. Alright, while it's drying from being primed, we're going to use Liquitex modeling putty, and I'm going to apply this all over the base, a 40mm base. And then what I'm going to do is rapidly dry the top of it with a hair dryer, so it's still soft and pliable, but the top is safe to touch. Then I'm going to take a thick dry brush and I'm going to tap, pat it all over to create like a weird pattern or texture onto the thing. And then once it dries a little bit, I'm going to take the base part that is now completely primed, and I'm now going to make a slight indent onto there. And then when I apply it on there, I'm going to take a dry brush again and I'm going to tap these putty again so that it sort of blends better. And then I'm going to take the back of the brush and then I'm going to insert that in and rotate around a bit to create like little moon craters to go with the overall moon base scheme that I've been going on with Votann. Alright, now for pre-coating. With Eshin Gray, Gray Seer, White Scar White, and Lamian Medium, we're going to do the pre-coating. So first we're going to take an airbrush, and we're going to load up Eshin Gray in there and mix it with water, and then we're going to apply this all over the, model, more specifically the bottom parts. Then we're going to take Gray Seer, and we're going to apply it through an airbrush mixed with water so it can flow better, and then apply this from an upper 45-degree angle, highlighting the model, and thus creating light and dark shadows. Then we're going to take White Scar White and a dry brush, and the very rounded plate-like armor of the League of Votann guys makes it so that this step isn't that good, or it doesn't take as well. So we're essentially going to dry brush, focusing on the edges and parts of his face as well, and yeah, that's pretty much it, and the few sharp edges that do exist. And then once that's done, we're going to take Lamian Medium, mix it in with the White Scar, and we're going to paint pretty much all the edges because the dry brush will not pick it up. That's one of the downsides of these very rounded armors, that dry brushing on it isn't that good. And now what I did is I take super glue and I'm just going to glue the base onto the base. Yeah, I'm going to glue them together. Now I want to point out this is probably like 36 hours after I applied this to the model. I don't know, it's very hard for me to start the model kits. Is when I get to the regular painting that I speed up. Alright, back to the modeling paste. Because the plastic base kind of sticks out from the pre-made base that I made. And so I'm going to basically take a small brush and I'm going to fill in the little gap so it isn't such a sharp drop, so it isn't that noticeable. And then rapidly dry it with a hair dryer and then tap it with a dry brush to make it blend in better with the base. Alright, now for some painting. Now we're going to take Thunderhawk Blue and Lamian Medium and we're going to paint the armor. So basically I took 2 brushes worth of Thunderhawk Blue and I put 3 drops from Lamian Medium from a dropper. It's very hard to follow these directions, but this is just the basic guideline because you might have a different size brush or you may not have an actual dropper like I do. So basically get it to a certain thickness, consistency, and then I just apply this all over the armor. Alright then, with Abaddon Black and Lamian Medium, we're going to create a mix again to the same ratio as before. And then we're going to apply this on his left arm shield and guns, and the cylinders on his back there. Unfortunately, because I did not really pre-coat them or paint lines on the cylinders, because I didn't think I could do it well, there's no real highlighting or distinction on them. They look a little plain. Alright then, with Viridian Hue and French Ultramarine, we're going to create the oil wash. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to put a lot of Viridian Hue and just a little bit of the darker French Ultramarine, mix it, and to make a greenish turquoise, closer to bluish. Then we're going to add mineral spirits in to turn it into a wash. Now, how many times you have to apply layers and stuff like that depends on how thick you want the wash. So I applied enough and made it into a very thick wash. It's not a sludge. It's somewhere between watery and a, well, thick sludge. And so I apply this all over the armor. And then I rapidly dry it with a hair dryer and make sure like there's no real big pockets of stuff of the wash. Then I wipe it away with a makeup brush. The excess goes in out of the way, and so the deepest, darkest recesses are filled with this. And then once that is done, I then take what remains of the oil paint I made, mix, and then I add a lot more mineral spirits to it, creating a much thinner wash. I then apply this all over the model, and then I wipe it again with a brush, and or with a makeup sponge. And then finally, I then take a paintbrush with pure mineral spirits. I dip it in mineral spirits, and I basically wipe the most prominent, most raised areas to try to remove the wash in its entirety, so there's a good progress of highlight to shadows to deep shadows. Alright, now with Lamp Black, we're going to make a wash out of this as well with mineral spirits, and then we're going to apply this all over his cylinders and his shield, basically the black parts. And then once that dries, we're then going to do a wipe with a makeup sponge to clean it up. And on the cylinders, we're mostly going to wipe the most raised areas or the parts of the cylinder that are closer to the top. That way, so there's like some sort of lighting, and it's okay. Alright, with Doombull Brown, Thondia Brown, and Mephiston Red, we're going to knock out some details. So we're going to take Doombull Brown, water it down a lot, and apply it to the axe handle. However, because I didn't dry brush this as well, the details of the handle aren't really picked out that well and looks a little bland. Then with Thondia Brown, with a good amount of water, I'll apply it to the strap that's underneath it, and this will naturally highlight and everything, because there was some dry brushing done to the wrap. And then with Mephiston Red, we're going to take this and apply this to the fur hair thing that's on this ornament. Now with Wild Rider Red and Burnt Umber Oil Color, we're going to knock out a few details. So with Wild Rider Red, we're going to further highlight that red hair mane thing by edge highlighting it along all the major strands of hair that are popping out. Then we're going to take Burnt Umber, create an oil wash with that with mineral spirits, and then we're going to apply this to, well, the hair piece as well. I didn't show that, but the axe handle and the strap that it has. and it added a little bit of depth, but it didn't really fix the handle. Alright, with Dawnstone, XV88, Thunderhawk Blue, and Grayseer, we're going to paint the base. So first we're going to paint the whole thing with Dawnstone. Then we're going to take XV88, and what we're going to do is basically, we got paint in our water. We're going to water down XV88 a lot to make it very translucent. We're going to apply it pretty much everywhere to add a slightly brownish tint to it. Then we're going to take Thunderhawk Blue and we're going to water it down heavily as well. And this way, so it's so thin that it'll just create a tint to the base. Then we're going to take Grayseer and a dry brush, and we're going to dry brush the whole thing. But the dry brush didn't work too well. I don't know why it didn't work this time. But then I went back with Thunderhawk Blue because the colors were off, it seemed. I needed it to be bluer. And so then I just applied another very thin down layer of Thunderhawk Blue all over the base. And then once I dried it, with the help of a hairdryer, I then dry brushed it again with Grayseer, and this time it worked better. I don't know what happened the first time. Alright then, with Cadian Flesh Tone, Pallid Witch Flesh, Thondia Brown, Thunderhawk Blue, and I don't show it here, but Guilliman Flesh, contrast paint, we're going to paint the head. Now we're going to start off with the base layer of Cadian Flesh Tone all over the skin. And I realize there's no real depth or shadow here. So then that's when I go back to the Guilliman Flesh and I water it down a bit. I can't really tell you how much because mine is very dried out, so it needs water just to be operable. So I watered it down quite a bit and then applied it to the skin to create shadows and of depth there. Then I went back with Cadian Flesh Tone and highlighted 90% of it. And then I took Pallid Witch Flesh and mixed it in with the Cadian Flesh Tone to make it lighter, and I highlighted it again. Now, one way to do this for such very fine detail is actually not to paint lines. What you do is you take your finely tipped brush and you just tap it. You do many taps in a line, and that's how you apply very small controlled amounts of paint. Of course, you also take your brush and touch a paper towel so that the mass exodus of paint and stuff flows into there, so you don't have any massive spills the moment your brush touches the model. But so once it's drained of all excess water, you then do a bunch of taps in a line. And so what I'm doing is I'm more like just tapping where I want the highlights and colors to be. And that's how you do all these very fine details with a fine brush, because his ears are sort of cauliflowered, cut up a bit. That's what it looks like. His brow is very burrowed and stuff, so there's a lot of depth there, potentially little hills. And so once that is done, I then take, I can't remember the exact order, but basically I take some more Guilliman Flesh, I apply it into his mouth to add some more depth and onto his lips, but it was very dilute at that time, so it didn't make much of a color change. Then I take Thondia Brown and I water it down a lot. Not so that it's super translucent, but, well, close to that. I start with very diluted because then you can keep adding more. And then I basically apply it to his eyes to create shadow. Then I took Thunderhawk Blue and diluted it heavily, and then I applied it to his eyes, the center, like a dot of it there. So like there's Thondia Brown on the edge and Thunderhawk Blue in the middle. And then I took a very fine brush, made sure the tip was nice, and some Pallid Witch Flesh and just applied a dot on each eye as best I could. One eye is more open than the other. This is a very nerve-wracking and slow process. And now with a 0.25mm micro pen, you can get these at your arts and crafts store, I painted his eyes. Now, this time, I finally found out how to make my camera focus. Well, I found out a while ago, but like I haven't done any eyes since then. And so basically what's going to happen is I can finally show you the process. And I'm going to show you in real time because you can see how slow and arduous it is. So basically what I do is I carefully hold it, carefully stare into it as best I can, and then I lightly tap it. Like once and twice. Every additional tap thickens the eye. And then I went to the other eye and I tapped it and I screwed it up and I made it look like his left eye is pointing down, his right eye is looking up. And so I went back and with a few more taps thickened the eyes, and I fixed the one on the right a bit more so that it looks more balanced. So it's a very hard, careful process, but this is the best I can do. And then with Doombull Brown and XV88, I'm going to paint his hair. So I'm going to start with the base layer of Doombull Brown on his beard, his mustache, and his head, top of his head. Then I'm going to take XV88 and mix it in with the Doombull Brown, so it's sort of a 50-50-ish mix. Then I take a very thin brush and I paint thin lines along his beard and mustache. and paint it on the top layer of his head. Then I take pure XV88 and I paint very fine lines along his beard and a line across the bottom of his jaw, you can think of it like that. And for the top of his head, because it's sort of like uneven for hair, I just did a bunch of taps all the way going from the front to the back to show unevenness in the hair. And with Troll Slayer Orange, I use this to go back and add some more color to that mane. Basically, it just was still too dull, so this is just to brighten it up and make a few of the strands stand out more. Alright, we're essentially done with all the non-metals, so with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, we're going to apply this all over the model of everything we painted. The body, the head, the base. Alright, with Abaddon Black, Vallejo, Exhaust, Manifold, and Duraluminum, which is basically a dark metal and a light metal, we're going to paint the metal. So essentially the exhaust manifold is not dark enough, and so the basic idea is that for these metal pieces, since they're so tiny and stuff, transitional colors is not going to be that noticeable. So to make it stand out better, the best thing to do is to have high contrast, so you can clearly and obviously see black next to white, even if it's super small. So I basically take Abaddon Black, mix it in with the exhaust manifold, and make it black metal, or close to it. And then I apply it on his gun barrels, his axe, head, and several metal pieces, parts of those black cylinders on his back, the pipes that are going everywhere, and the joints of his suit. I know it's probably not metal, but like I like it that way, so it stands out more. And then basically I take the duraluminum, and for the axe shaft, I paint straight lines along the edges of it, the flat parts, the edges of each piece of metal and such, and I also apply it to flat planes on the cylinders and stuff, just to highlight the circles and stuff. Yeah, basically use the duraluminum just to highlight edges, most raised areas and such on his metal. Alright, with Warp Block Bronze, Retributor Armor, and a little bit of Liberator Gold. Actually, Liberator Gold was kind of a waste. It wasn't noticeable. But so basically with Warp Block Bronze, watered down of course so it flows better, I use it to cover all the metal runes, basically to flood the base of his armor. It's sunken in. And so I did this all over the model and stuff where all these runes were. Then I took Retributor Armor and carefully, with a fine brush, painted the tops of all his runes, especially the very meticulous one on his right shoulder. Then, with Liberator Gold, I tried it for a little bit, but for the life of me, I could not see a difference. I saw a very slight difference, but it was so slight it wasn't even worth it. And now with Everland Sunset and Uriel Yellow, because I keep missing this detail every time, to paint these lights that he has on his chest and apparently belt. So basically Everland Sunset covering it, and then Uriel Yellow in the center as a dot to make a light. We will then proceed to glue the model all together with super glue, because I'm not bothering with model glue anymore. It's too much of a mess, and it takes forever to work. And now, with this new tool I got, Microset. Basically, it's for decals. It's better than what I've been using. Essentially, it'll help it conform to the shape of the model that it's on, as well as far as I understand it, make the decals look better, more natural. So, I apply a layer of it onto where it's going, I apply it onto the decal until it gets softened, and I apply it off. I think this was a very slow, dumb way. I'm going to apply it by throwing it in a pot of water and letting it remove naturally. Then I move it onto the spot and I apply some more of the microset on top of it. And then I wait for it to dry for about 30 seconds before I get bored, and then use a hairdryer to finish it off. And then to set it in, I go back with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish and apply 2 layers on it. I apply, dry with a hairdryer, and then apply again to get rid of the shine, and it works well. There's no whitening or any issues on there. The color looks great. It looks like it's a part of the model. Alright, so pretty good. Microset. Very nice. And with Mephiston Red and Squighide Orange, I believe. I've grabbed the wrong paint for this picture. And then with Uriel Yellow and Pallid Witch Flesh, we're going to paint his powered axe. So we're going to paint the whole thing with Mephiston Red, but ignore the rune. Then we're going to take the Troll Slayer Orange, we're going to paint thin lines along the whole thing to make it look like a color transition. Then we're also going to paint like the edges of the blade, the fold, bend, all that stuff with the Troll Slayer Orange. And once that's done, we're going to take Uriel Yellow, but this is pretty strong. I probably should have mixed it with some Troll Slayer Orange to make it less so obvious. So I paint thin lines all over, going up and down, on both sides, on the tip, on the front and the back, and then I paint the edges of the blade and such, and then I'd go to Pallid Witch Flesh and I do the same thing again, but I only paint like the most raised tip of the axe and blade, so you can still see some of the yellow underneath. And maybe I should have just stopped with the yellow. Mix the yellow with the orange. Yeah, the transition isn't that good. And then I I then seal the whole thing in AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish. And done. The Einhyr, I don't know how to pronounce it. This Einhyr champion is done. It was relatively an easy model. I mean, there's not that much to him. It's just his armor and the small little details here and there. So it's just, if you want to make it to a high quality paint job, it's a little, there's a high ceiling because of all the different plates of his armor and stuff. But overall, there's not that much uniqueness to him. He's not like overly detailed. He doesn't have like 1,000 trophies on him or tons of stuff like that. He's actually pretty simple and basic, which, I mean, is pretty good in its own way. He has very nice slick armor, but he did not come with a helmet choice. It's one thing I noticed. There was no helmet option for his model. And also, I would like to point out that I actually wanted to make this magnetizable, and so that to swap between his giant super powerful hammer and the axe, which doubles his attacks, by the way. That's balanced, so he has 8 attacks. But essentially the thing was, the way the model's designed is his hand that holds the thing, the arm that he has overlaps onto the hand, and basically what would happen is that it would look very ugly and awkward because it's like it has to be glued together. It has to be one piece. I was looking at this, that's ridiculous. I don't know, just probably a scheme from Games Workshop to make you not being able to magnetize this, but whatever. But overall, the model was an interesting one. It's how do I put it? It's both very clean in its design, very simple. It's not overly it looks a little different than 40k. It's like I'm beginning to notice this Votann seems to be like generic sci-fi with a bit of like Tolkien dwarves thrown in for some style, but they're not overly embellishing their stuff. Like they don't have huge liveries or anything like that, or anything that really makes them super unique or standoutish. They look a bit generic and yet a little bit of uniqueness to them. I don't know. But overall, very simple model to paint. I just keep putting it off. So, like the video if you like the video, share it if you want to share it, comment if you want to comment, and more to come eventually.